Conversation 1.
What social networking sites do you use?
I use Facebook and Skype mainly, and I also have Instagram. I'm from Dubai, so it's really important for me to keep in contact with relatives and friends back home.
How often do you Skype?
I Skype every weekend when I know my family are at home. The connection isn't always brilliant, but I like being able to talk to my little brother and see if he's changed at all. I guess I spend about an hour a day on social media, including Skype.
How do you use Facebook?
Whenever I have my laptop on, I have Facebook open. If a friend posts a photo, I usually comment on it or send a like. It doesn't take me long, and it lets my friends know I'm still thinking of them, even though I'm so far away. I post a lot of updates and photos, too, so that my friends know what is happening in my life.
What about Instagram?
Photography is one of my big interests. I always have my camera with me when I go out, and if I take an interesting photo, I'll post it to my profile page and hope I get some comments. There are some brilliant photographers on Instagram, and I follow some of them to get inspiration. I'm learning a lot about photography by spending time on Instagram and sharing ideas about photography. Conversation 2.
What social networking sites do you use?
I use Twitter and Facebook. I don't have much time for anything else. I'm doing a course in journalism, so I find Twitter very useful for keeping up with news and current affairs.
How often do you visit the sites?
I check my news feed 3 or 4 times a day and go on Facebook once a day. On average, I'd say I spend around half an hour a day on Twitter and Facebook.
How do you use the sites?
Twitter's great for breaking news. If there's a big story in the news, I want to know about it when it happens, and not to have to wait until I get home and see it on TV. I'm very active on Twitter. I follow lots of well-known journalists and politicians, and I'll tweet comments if it's a topic I care about. I also follow a couple of journalists' blogs. They're really interesting, and I've made a lot of good professional contacts. I'm pretty active on those too. I regularly post comments and get involved in the conversation.
What about Facebook?
It's different. I have a Facebook account mainly for contact with family and friends. I don't use it that much. A couple of times a week, I post updates and photos so they can see what I've been up to. And I check out their Facebook pages to see what they've been doing. Facebook's a great way of keeping in touch with people. A lot of my friends use it for arranging their social life, but I don't. I prefer to text people, so I'm not on Facebook too much, and don't get distracted by all the posts in my news feed.
There's a lot of gloom about the future for print newspapers. What do you think will happen to them?
A lot of the smaller national newspapers definitely won't survive. You can see it already. As more and more people are going online for their news, many are struggling to make a profit, and some big names, like The Independent, have already ended print production.
What about the famous news brands like The Wall Street Journal and The Times? Will they still be around in 10 years?
I think so. News organizations like The Times already have successful news sites, and they'll probably continue to print newspapers too, but they may look very different.
In what way?
They're likely to be much smaller and have longer, in-depth articles.
But won't their websites do in-depth articles?
I doubt it. Readers want short news stories on the web that they can read on a small screen, on a tablet, or on a mobile. If readers want in-depth articles, it's much easier to read in print, and that won't change.
So, do you think the newspapers will look more like magazines in the future?
I think so. They will certainly have the same high-quality photographs as a magazine, and in-depth reports and stories, but they might come out weekly.
Ah, so quite different. How will online news sites make their money?
Mainly by subscription. Famous brands like the Financial Times have already introduced paid subscriptions. I think others are bound to do the same.
I'm surprised. Do you think people will be willing to pay for their news?
Initially, maybe not. Many people are reluctant to pay for news online, but that's sure to change in the future. There's so much information and news on the internet, some of it good, some of it bad, and a lot of it inaccurate, and people are feeling very confused. In the end, I think readers will be happy to pay a subscription to a well-known news brand that researches and checks its stories and employs quality journalists. If newspapers have an international focus and can get the business model right, I think they have a bright future.
At about 8 p.m, a light came on in the cockpit. It indicated that a door on the outside of the plane was open. At 10:15 p.m, the pilot landed the plane at Reno Airport. Armed police surrounded the plane and checked inside. Cooper was not there, and neither was the money or two of the parachutes. His tie was left on his seat. The police looked for Cooper in the area where he jumped, but didn't find anyone. In fact, nobody saw Cooper ever again. However, in February 1980, a young boy called Brian Ingram was digging holes in the sand when he found some envelopes full of money. There were 2 packets of $120 bills and a third packet containing only 90. Tests showed that it was some of the money given to Cooper 9 years earlier. It is the only evidence of the hijacking ever found. To this day, nobody knows for sure what happened to the man known as Dan Cooper. First of all, the investigators gathered any evidence they could find. There was the black tie Cooper left behind on the seat in the aeroplane, and there were the 2 parachutes he didn't use. They also found 66 unidentified fingerprints. And then, of course, there was the money the young boy found. The investigators then began talking to anyone who spoke to Cooper, in particular, the flight attendant and the ticket sales clerk. They asked these witnesses lots of questions about Cooper. For example, how tall was he? What was he wearing? What was his voice like? Was he calm or excited? These descriptions helped the investigators to develop a complete picture of the man. In order to estimate where Cooper landed, investigators conducted an experiment. They sent the same plane on the same journey with the same pilot, and at the estimated time that Cooper jumped, they dropped a 91-kilogram weight from the plane. Once they had an idea of location, they began searching a very wide mountainous area. The FBI also contacted experts in several fields. Perhaps the most interesting theory came from psychology experts. Most psychologists agreed that Cooper probably had very serious and urgent financial problems, which forced him to do something so dangerous. However, some psychologists suggested he was a thrill seeker, meaning somebody who simply enjoyed extreme danger and excitement. While the FBI doesn't have a complete theory on Cooper, there are some things they believe. Based on his actions that day, they know he was a very careful planner. They think he knew the Seattle area very well. They also suggest he was an Air Force veteran, although they do not believe he had much experience with parachutes because the jump was simply too dangerous. It is this fact that convinces the FBI that Cooper did not survive. However, many people believe Cooper did survive, and some even claim to know his identity.
Witness account 1.
What were you doing when the robbery started?
I was queuing up to withdraw some money.
And what happened first?
I heard someone shouting, and when I turned around, I saw a man with a mask on his face.
Can you describe him?
He was about 6 feet tall and he was very thin.
And what was he wearing?
He was wearing grey trousers and a black top.
What was he shouting? Can you remember?
He was shouting, "Everybody on the floor."
Did he have a bag?
Yes, he had a plastic bag with him.
And what happened next?
He went up to the till next to me. Then he asked the cashier to put all the money she had in the bag. So the cashier put the money in the bag, and the man ran out of the bank.
Could you see where he went?
Yes, I could see him through the window. He got into a green car, and the car drove north along Sullivan Street.
OK, thank you. That's very useful.
Witness account 2.
Where were you when the robbers came in?
I was sitting in the corner of the bank when it happened. I was waiting to see the manager, because I have a problem with my account, you see. Anyway, suddenly 2 men came bursting into the bank. One stood by the door, and the other one went up to the counter.
And then what happened?
The man at the counter started shouting, "Put all the money in the case." He had a briefcase. Then he said, "Nobody will be hurt if you do what I say."
What did you do?
Well, I just stayed quiet and looked at him carefully because I knew the police were going to ask me. So he was about 5 feet 8 inches tall, and he was medium build. I think he was wearing grey trousers and a blue top. The other guy was shorter, and he was wearing all black.
Did the bank people get the money?
Yes. The cashier put all the money in the briefcase, and the 2 men ran out of the bank. They got into a brown car and drove off quickly. They went east towards the motorway.
Nowadays, there are many information organizations. For example, we have television, radio, newspapers, and of course the Internet. They all provide news and information to the general public. The word for all these organizations is media. It is an unusual word because it is a plural. The singular word is medium. This word has different meanings in everyday English, but here it means a way of communicating. For example, we can say, the Internet is the most important medium today. We often talk about the mass media. The word mass means a large amount, so we use the phrase for media that reaches a large number of people. The mass media have a lot of influence on the general public. This is because modern technology can give the news very fast to millions of people. So the media have a very big influence. In television and radio, we say information is broadcast to viewers and listeners. This means it is transmitted over a very wide area, perhaps over the whole world at the same time. People in many different countries often watch the same breaking news events live on television, for example.
Where do you think the first advert is from?
I think it comes from a women's magazine.
And who is the target audience?
Young women.
I agree. Maybe older women too.
What is the purpose of the ad?
To sell cosmetics.
Why is the target audience interested in adverts like this?
Because most women want to look attractive. They feel it's important.
That's a stereotype.
Maybe, but it's true.
And how does the ad persuade them to buy the product?
The woman is very beautiful. The message is, if you use this makeup, you will look beautiful too.
Do you think it's a good advert?
I don't like it. In my opinion, the image doesn't represent reality.
And how about you?
I don't believe it's a bad advert. It's not reality, but I think it's very effective.
Who created the ad? Who designed it?
I think an advertising agency designed the image.
I agree, and the cosmetics company paid for it. I think it was very expensive.
Good afternoon. My guest today is Julian Westbrook from the Association of Mobile Phone Networks. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
Now, most of us don't pay much attention to the mobile phone network until we suddenly find that we can't get a signal. But, in fact, building a network that covers the whole country was a big challenge, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. After the first mobile phones appeared in the 1980s, the phone companies had to work very fast to build a network that covered as much of the UK as possible.
Why was there such a hurry?
Basically because mobile phones became popular so quickly. In the mid-1980s, there were 2 mobile phone companies in the UK. The government gave them both permission to build a network. Each company was hoping to attract about 20,000 users during the next 10 years, but in fact, within 3 years, they had 500,000 users each.
So, how did they go about building this network? What is the network actually made of?
Well, it's made up of base stations. Lots of base stations. There are about 52,500 base stations in the UK today. They're all over the country, in towns and cities. Often they're hidden on the roofs of buildings, for example, so we aren't always aware of them. And there are hundreds of microcells in towns and cities too.
What are they?
Microcells? Well, they're much smaller than base stations, and they aren't as powerful, but they do the same job. Microcells are often hidden behind road signs or on the front of a building, disguised as part of it. They help to provide really good mobile phone reception in areas where lots of people need to use their phones.
You say that base stations and microcells are hidden, or sometimes hidden, but people still complain about them, don't they?
Yes, some people do. For 2 reasons, really. Firstly, often they can't be hidden, and people think they look ugly. And secondly, some people worry about the health effects of living near these base stations.
Yes, that is a concern for some people. But if we can just talk about the first point for a moment, what people don't understand is, why do we need so many of them? You know, why choose a historic town with beautiful buildings and put an ugly base station in the middle of it? Aren't there any laws to stop that? Can't they go somewhere else?
Well, there are rules about where you can put base stations, but the simple answer is no, they can't just go somewhere else. To get good mobile reception all over the country, we need to have base stations quite close together. In towns, they need to be between 200 and 500 metres apart, no more than that. In the countryside, they can be between 2 and 5 kilometres apart, depending on the landscape.
Why do they need to be so much closer together in towns?
2 reasons. Firstly, there are buildings in towns, and these block the signals. And secondly, there are more people making calls. Each base station can only deal with a certain number of calls at one time.
I see. And what about those health effects you mentioned earlier? Is there any evidence that living near a base station is bad for your health?
No, there isn't, and there have been plenty of studies into this. But some members of the public are not always convinced by these studies, so the research continues.
But as far as we can tell, these base stations are safe.
Yes, they are.
Julian, thank you very much.
Welcome to the Film Show, where today we're looking at the Hollywood biopic and why it's become so popular. Now, Hollywood has always used true stories in its films. In fact, they began making successful films in the 1920s, and since then there have been thousands of films based on true stories.
That's right, but in recent years there have been more and more biopics. Directors have turned to the lives of famous people as a source of material. So, why is it that some of the best films in recent years have been based on real events or inspired by real people?
Today we're talking to Rosie Truman, an actor and a film historian. Rosie, why do you think Hollywood is doing so many biopics?
Well, one reason is that audiences really enjoy films about people that they already know something about, but they want to know more. So from these films, we've learnt something. We've learnt about the difficult lives of some of the biggest music legends, like Ray Charles and Johnny Cash. And we've learnt about the lives of politicians, like George Bush, or sporting heroes, like Muhammad Ali. It's a way in which Hollywood can actually teach us about history in an entertaining way, and it's interesting.
Yes, I think that's right. But what about the actors, Rosie? I mean, many of the actors have won Oscars for their roles in these films. What's it like for them?
Well, I think actors just love these roles. It's very exciting to be asked to play a character who everyone already knows. Look at Helen Mirren. She won an Oscar for her role playing the Queen, and it's probably one of her greatest successes.
Oh, absolutely. So, how do they do it? How does an actor prepare for a role like this? Do they meet the person that they're going to play?
Well, yes, obviously, if that person is still alive, then that's a great way for the actor to study the character, to see how they move and how they talk. In fact, I know that Helen Mirren met the Queen for tea. You know, very English. And that really helped her to understand her character. And Will Smith, who played Muhammad Ali, well, when they met, they got on really well. And they became friends.
But what about playing a character that everyone knows, like George Bush, for example?
Yes, it's funny, actually. When you're playing a character that people recognise, you have to work really hard at getting the voice right. Josh Brolin played George Bush, and when he was preparing for the film, he talked to himself all day in a Texan accent. He even phoned hotels in Texas just so he could listen to their accent.
Really? That's funny. What about actors who can't meet the character in person? What do they do?
Well, there are other ways to prepare. Audrey Tautou, for example, she played Coco Chanel, so she couldn't meet her in person, but she watched hours and hours of film footage. She watched her in interviews and she looked at photographs. Tautou wanted to look like Coco Chanel when she was on screen, so that we would recognise her image.
That's right. And it was a beautiful film.
It was. And you know, one of the things
I'm really keen on drama and always audition for the school play. In the past, I've always been given a small part, but this year I got a main part. I was so excited, and nervous too, of course. Mrs. Novak, the director, was lovely, really kind and helpful. She taught me a lot. The most difficult thing was learning all the lines. I locked myself in my bedroom for hours and hours, saying them over and over again until I'd remembered them. The one problem I had was my costume. We all had to get our own costumes, as the school didn't have any. I wasn't sure what to do. I needed to look like a woman from hundreds of years ago. In the end, I had my dress made by my neighbour, Mrs. Davis. She's really good at sewing. She did an amazing job, and I looked fantastic. I'm so grateful to her